As many of you may remember, or as some of you may be trying to forget, Waterworld came out 25 years ago today. And we're going to talk about it. Hello friends, welcome back to the show. So glad to see you all once again. And if you're new here, thanks for stopping by. This is the channel where we go back and talk about movies and TV shows that we grew up on from the 80s and 90s and look at them from the perspective of being an adult today. And today we have a very special episode. I'm going to be talking about a movie that came out in the mid-90s, 25 years ago today, as a matter of fact, Waterworld. And many of you have heard about this and maybe not in the best way. And I'm going to do my best in this video to convince you why Waterworld deserves to have a second look.
Those who survived have adapted to a new world.
Now, if you came here to see me continue to review Batman Beyond, which is the series that we're working through right now, don't worry, I will release that episode later in the week, but it felt appropriate that today I had to release this video because it happened to fall on the anniversary of, honestly, I'm not afraid to admit, one of my favorite movies, Waterworld. This is one of those movies that has not been forgotten about. It still comes up in conversation. People still talk about this movie. Not for the best reasons. And I am one that I remember distinctly, and it's crazy to think that how vivid my memory is of 25 years ago, of sitting in the movie theater with my big bucket of popcorn and my cherry Coke and watching Waterworld for the first time. I loved the movie from the moment I saw it. It was right in my wheelhouse and checked all the boxes for what I loved as a kid for movies. Now, granted, in 1995, in July 1995, I was 12. So my caliber of movies was not high. I get that. But I had friends. In fact, one of my best friends all through school hated this movie. And this was the source of a lot of arguments that we had and still have to this day. It's a recurring joke how I think I said at one point that Waterworld was my all-time favorite movie. Maybe I've backed down from that statement a little bit. I don't think that it's the greatest movie ever made, but I do think that it's a really fun, great movie. And I just recently watched it again, as I do from time to time. And here we are 25 years later, and I stand firm on my argument that it is a good movie that still holds up. And holds up better than I think some movies from the 90s, and we'll talk all about that. But I wanted to do a video, pay homage to this movie 25 years later in the theme of this channel. And I came up with the idea of giving you my top 10 reasons why Waterworld deserves a second chance. I feel like it's my personal campaign as maybe one of the few true fans of this movie, and to try to convince others and try to influence others to at least give it a second look. I'm not trying to convince you that this is the best movie ever made or this should be put up against Citizen Kane or anything like that. My argument is simply that the movie is not as bad as everybody tries to make it out to be. Now, I get it. I have a lot of nostalgic feelings for this, and we've talked about this on the series before, that there's certain shows and movies that I have such a nostalgic attachment to, as I'm sure you do too, for certain entertainment pieces that if you were to show them to somebody new for the first time, they fall apart. But I'm going to make some arguments in this list that have nothing to do with nostalgic factor, although I know that carries a lot of weight. That this movie has some qualities to it that surpass the nostalgic factor. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to pose a little bit of a challenge to you. So these are not really in any particular order. I'm going to do them from 10 to 1 just to increase suspense, I guess. But they're really not in any particular order. Just sort of some random points that I wanted to make about this movie. So let's get started.
You got 2 hours.
I'll only need 1.
Number 10. The challenges that this movie faced, production-wise, that everybody hears about, were the fuel that created some of the most amazing visuals that you can see in a movie. We've all heard these different rumors, and some of them are rumors. I remember one of the things that I heard early on was that the atoll that they used to film this, that cost them million some dollars, sunk halfway through the production and they had to dredge it back up. Now, there's other reports of the producers and directors that say that never happened. That was just purely a rumor. They also said that, stuntmen had died on the movie. Again, that is all just rumors. There's no documented evidence that actually happened, but that was things that were printed in the papers at that time. And just the overwhelming elephant in the room that, as the name would imply, most of the movie takes place on water. And that in itself is a huge challenge. It's hard to predict water, and they found the best location they could, but they did suffer several hurricanes did come through to shut down production, and there really wasn't much they could do about that. And the director, Kevin Reynolds, even spoke to Spielberg before they went into production on this to ask if he had any advice about filming on water, because as Spielberg had experience filming Jaws, he said, yeah, don't do it. And that resulted in one of arguably the greatest movies ever made, Jaws. So it's not a valid argument to hold that against the movie Waterworld, to go, oh, they had all these production problems, so it resulted in a bad movie. Because it didn't. I think it did the exact opposite. The realness of them being on water and the way that the light hits and the way that the water, the boats move and all of those things that they had to figure out different ways of shooting, lining up a shot, because their camera was in one boat and the actors were in the other boat and trying to line that up, and it moves it causes, if you really look closely, you can see some production inconsistencies where the shadow's falling this way one time and then it's falling the other way the other, if you really want to analyze it. But I think that it made for some really inventive shots that they had to do out of necessity, and it's shots that you wouldn't normally think of, or that they wouldn't normally think of. As much control as they can have, the better. But you know what that also results in is just a very plain, milquetoast, basic movie. Whereas you go out into the wild and all of a sudden, oh, the wind's blowing this way and the ship's wanting to go that way. Well, let's turn the camera around this way and get this shot. And, oh, maybe since we can't get that, we'll try this one. And it just adds to a whole nother layer of production quality. So I think that argument that because the movie had so many production problems made the movie worse is completely incorrect. I think it made the movie better.
You can assume that we're all having a real lousy day.
Number 9, read the IMDB reviews. I know this one sounds a little weird, and I don't normally use this as an argument, but it's amazing to me that I grew up over the last 25 years, hearing about how much everybody hated this movie, how much of a flop it was. And I always felt like an anomaly. I always felt like every time I would watch that movie, even as I grew up, I go, this movie's not that bad. This movie's really entertaining. This is fun. And, and the further I got away from 1995 and the more that other movies are coming out I kept going back to this one. And this one held a spot in my kind of running list of top 10 movies. And I never understood that. And I was like, why am I the only person that likes this movie, is what it felt like. Well, when I watched the movie just the other day, I, on a whim, just kind of looked at IMDb. In fact, I'll pull it up right now. I don't focus a lot on this, and this is probably why it's so far down on the list, but I'll mark movies that I want to see in IMDb. And sometimes when I go back and I look at, they have the IMDb rating, which is controlled by users. People like you and me can, give the movie stars 1 to 10 and write a review and all that. And then they have the Metascore, which is critics' reviews that are put in there. And every once in a while, I'll put a movie in here that I want to see, and then I'll go back and be like, oh my gosh, it's got a 2-star average IMDb rating. Maybe it's not that good. Maybe I won't, invest the time in watching that. Or see the the Metascore being like in the 20s or teens or something, be like, maybe it's not as good as I think. And I was expecting that when I went in here. No, this one, the average score is 6.2. Not great, but it's above average, and the Metascore is 56, and I think that goes up to 100. Again, kind of in the middle, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I started combing through some of the reviews, and I'm just gonna right now for the this is all live. This is the top reviews that pop up. 8 out of 10, not nearly as bad as everyone says. 7 out of 10, not the worst movie ever made. 10 out of 10, why do people hate this film? 7 out of 10, not bad at all. 8 out of 10, far from the awful movie people make it out to be. And it goes on and on and on like this. Go look at it for yourself. And I started going, oh, I'm not alone. People finally are giving this movie a chance. Further we get ourselves removed from 1990s and being swallowed up in that media frenzy. And especially back then, that was before the internet was really prominent. So it was like you were talking about newspaper blurbs and little pockets of information that's going out that way that were really influencing the public. And you get a couple of bad reviews, movie reviews, out of the newspaper, which is the only place to get it. Then you go, oh, I'm not going to go pay the $10 a ticket to go see it. I'll go see something else. And I think a lot of people didn't give the movie a chance. And now, fast forward to now where it's like streaming and it's on TV and it's, see clips and stuff on the internet and stuff. People are now watching it. And IMDB, which is average users, average viewers that have nothing to gain by this, are going, you know what? The movie's not as bad as it seems. So if you don't believe me, go on IMDb and just take a little cruise through there and see what the general consensus is. Certainly there are still some reviews that are in there that are just, oh, this movie's horrible, horrendous. But there's a vast majority of people that are going, you know what? It's not as bad as you think.
Well, if you want to do something right, you've got to do it yourself.
Number 8, the music alone is worth watching the movie for a second time. A lot of times you watch a movie and you leave there and the music helped influence your feelings towards the movie and certainly, set the mood and all of that. This is one of the movies that I remember leaving the theater going, wow, that music was so good. And then running out to Circuit City or whatever store that I was buying music and buying the CD soundtrack of Waterworld and listening to that. And this was in the time when, you go to the theater and watch the movie, and it would be several months before the movie would become available, and even longer than that before, you could be able to rent the movie at a cheaper rate. The new releases were always more expensive. So I would buy the soundtrack to some of these movies and sit there and listen to the soundtrack and replay the movie in my mind. The music of this by James Newton Howard is like a character of itself. And it is so, every time that theme comes on, gets me excited, gets me engaged into it. And it just adds to the fun, adventure, swashbuckling feel of the movie, which again, is not for everybody, but that is certainly my personal taste, that I just really love that kind of element. But again, go watch the movie, if nothing else, just to listen to the music and just see how the music plays and connects with that. Because of the new Blu-ray release of the movie box set, there's a really great documentary that's on there that talks about the music and the composer. And I guess that was one of the points of contention between, the infamous feud between Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Costner. And that was really what put them over the edge. Was in post-production, they had a big disagreement on how the music should be. And the original, Kevin Reynolds' original director's cut had a totally different composer and a totally different mood to the movie with the music. And it was much darker and it was much more moody and much more in solitary, kind of dealing with that solitary elements of the Mariner. And Kevin Costner wanted it to be a bigger blockbuster, summer, swashbuckling, heroic, lone man against the world kind of theme. And I think Kevin Costner was right. Again, it makes it much more of a popcorn blockbuster movie, but I think that's what's fun about it. I'd be interested to see what the version is with that other soundtrack, but knowing how big of an influence the music has for me in enjoying the movie, I would challenge that was probably the right call to have a new soundtrack laid into the movie. So that itself is worth a second viewing.
You don't like my singing, do you?
Number 7. It is just such a beautiful movie to watch. If you ignore the story and you take the characters out and just look at the movie, it is so beautiful. I mean, on the water, off the coast of Hawaii, where they filmed it, the lighting and the color of the water and the sky and the sunsets and the mood of it, it's such a just great, visually pleasing movie to watch. This is one of the qualities of the movie that I think that we won't get again. This movie stands on its own because of the challenges of filming on water and the cost involved in that, and now the increased quality of visual effects and studio work and stuff. If this movie was made today, they would never film it on location. It would be filmed in a tank somewhere in the Universal backlots, with green screen, and everything would be digitally added. It would probably look pretty perfect. But there's something very appealing about watching this movie and knowing that it's all real. Most of it. There are a few digital shots which are kind of obvious because the digital visual effects was not as good in the 90s, but most of the movie, and that's why most of the movie was shot on location, shot on real practical sets, because it was so expensive to do visual effects. That just wasn't a reality, and it was cheaper to ship everybody out to Hawaii and live on boats and all that kind of stuff than it was to build this in the computer. But for that reason, it's worth another look just to see a type of movie from an era that is probably gone. I know there's a few revolutionary directors now that are going, hey, why don't we shoot this in camera rather than in the computer? And you really kind of have to have the clout to be able to afford to do that because visual effects are so much cheaper now. So for that fact, it's worth watching just to see these locations. And that was a thing that was a bigger deal to movies than what they are now. In the early days of movies, traveling wasn't as easy or as cheap as it is now. Very few people traveled to these exotic locations. And so to watch movies, that was your gateway into being able to see those. And so looking at it from that perspective of like, hey, never been to Hawaii? This is a great way to see some of the water around in Hawaii, seeing this location that, a lot of people don't get to go to, that don't get to see. And it's not just fabricated from somebody's brain in a computer or a bunch of ones and zeros. It's a real thing that they pulled in through the lens of a camera and actually made on spot.
And we're going?
You and I are. Kid, we got to pitch over the side.
Number 6. The casting of this movie is spot on. In the time period that this was made, certainly if you could do a case study and go, well, if the movie was made today, this is the cast that would be in it, and they would be this much better or whatever. But in the 90s, when this movie was made, this is the all-star cast of this movie. I mean, Kevin Costner was one of the bigger box office draws in the 90s, and just coming off of Dances with Wolves and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and movies like that, to put him in this action-adventure movie was a no-brainer. And he was one that really pushed this project forward. It was something that he really wanted to do.
Because I've sailed farther than most have dreamed.
Dennis Hopper, arguably, in my opinion, one of the best 90s villains, from Speed and Super Mario Brothers, say what you want about that movie, but is just such a great villain, iconic caricature villain.
We gotta keep an eye out for that icky freak.
And then you look at Enola, Tina Majorino, that I think is how you say it. Such a great child actor that really made that role worth it. And there's so many great moments. I remember leaving that the theater going, gosh, she's really good in that.
He could be right behind you and you won't even know it till you're dead.
Another favorite character actor of mine, Michael Jeter, plays a fantastic, fun role in this.
Not supposed to go yet! Infernal machine!
And on down the line, you watch this movie and it's just kind of, there's not a lot of characters in it by the nature of the film, but the ones that did, when they're on screen, they hold your attention, they fit their roles perfectly. Yeah, there's some kind of broad stroke characters that are in there, which I think just adds to the fun of it. So I think the casting is another great reason that's worth checking it out in itself.
Hello, good morning, or night, whichever the case may be.
Number 5, the infamous feud between Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Costner, I think, brought out the best in each other. This is another media thing that was talked about a lot that I remember hearing, was about Kevin Reynolds, the director, and Kevin Costner, the actor, that were constantly fighting on set and hated each other and couldn't work together, and Kevin Reynolds walked off the set and Kevin Costner had to finish the movie. And some of that's true, some of it's incorrect. Kevin Reynolds did not quit the movie until post-production, and that was over the music thing, as I had mentioned earlier. But also, it's, if you look at everything in context, that pairing made Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which I think a lot of people consider to be a great movie. I enjoy that movie. I love that movie as well. And here you put the same pairing of people together. Seems like it should be on caliber with the same quality. Same, I don't know what I'm trying to say. If you like Kevin Reynolds as a director for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, it seems like this movie's not that far removed from that. And Kevin Costner is an actor, and that pairing, like, look what they brought out to make that movie. And then you look at this movie, same thing. And again, I don't know all the details of their relationship, but I know that they were friends and they consulted on Dances with Wolves, and they have a long time relationship, but they do butt heads, and that they have artistic differences. I think in a lot of creative endeavors, sometimes you need a little bit of friction. You need a friend to go, hey, you know what, that stinks. Try it this way. Oh no, I don't like that. And sometimes just being pushed and shoved in a different direction creates a better result. If it was a different actor that just said yes to everything that Kevin Reynolds told him to do, maybe the performance wouldn't have been what it was, or vice versa. If it was Kevin Costner working with a different director that just saw him as a big superpower, a superstar, and just go, okay, yeah, you want to do that? All right, we'll have you do that. That's fine. And didn't fight him on that, I don't think that the friction would have brought out the best results. Furthermore, it's so much more interesting media material to go, oh, these two superpowers, can't get along, can't work together. And they stormed off, and they once were friends, and this movie tore them apart. And yet, you look at their relationship, they've continued to collaborate. As recent as the Hatfield and McCoy's miniseries that Kevin Costner did. Kevin Reynolds was involved in that. So it doesn't add up to me that they hate each other as much as everybody wants to make that seem. And again, that shouldn't be a reason not to like the movie, because I think the acting and directing in this movie is good. And I think it goes back to what they were able to bring out of each other. Just my opinion.
I'm not giving it to her. It's just...
Alone.
Yeah. I'm not giving it to her.
Number 4. This movie has some of the best adventure elements that you'll see on screen. If you're a fan of adventure movies, this has some of all the best elements of that. This kind of swashbuckling hero that you find in The Mariner is just such a fun character. The villains being these sort of grungy modern day pirates is so much fun. The hero vehicle is the Trimariner, which is just such a cool boat, which was really built. One of the central sets, the atoll of this floating island.
We are safe behind this wall!
Aren't we?
wind is such a cool sci-fi neat element. They even find a way to work airships into it. I mean, so many cool elements of sci-fi and adventure. You've got the main character is that has gills and web toes that helps him swim underwater and breathe underwater. That's cool. The legend of this land that they're trying to get to. I mean, so many elements that it's such a cool, fun idea for a movie. And who doesn't like being out on the water? And I know when I watched Robin Hood, going back to that example, me and my brothers would watch that movie and the woods and all that. And then we'd run across the street and we would play Robin Hood out in the woods and make our own bow and arrows and swing across vines and all that, because it just brought out those adventure elements. Same thing with this movie. We go swimming and we go out to the lake or the pool and would play Waterworld. And it's just such a neat fantasy world of like, oh yeah, what if you lived on the water? I want to own a sailboat to this day, probably because of Waterworld. Is just him swinging around the boat. It has so many great fun adventure elements. And if you're into those type of movies, this has all those elements wrapped up in a beautiful package. Number 3. The argument it's just Mad Max on water is not a reason not to like it. Mad Max was a really popular movie and was a huge hit and a huge success, and everybody liked it. And there was a period of time after that movie came out where everybody was trying to make the next Mad Max movie. The screenwriter of this movie, Peter Rader, was challenged with that. They said, hey, we want another Mad Max movie. And he came up with this idea of Mad Max on water. And everybody kind of uses that as this negative, oh, it's just Mad Max on water. That was the point. That's exactly what they were trying to do. As a matter of fact, it has the same director of photography, Dean Samler. They were trying to make Mad Max on water. That was the whole point of this movie. That's how it started. I enjoy Mad Max as much as the next person, but I think that this takes the best qualities of Mad Max and improves on it. The thing that you see with a lot of post-apocalyptic movies is it's this ugly dystopian future and everything's dirty and grungy and filthy, and that's what Mad Max is, you know? And this has those elements, but then it's in this beautiful contrasting landscape of the water and now they're not just driving through the mud, but they're sailing through the waters on these boats. And the hero vehicle, I think, is so much better in this one, the Trimariner, rather than just a bulletproof, big tank-looking thing. To me, I look at movies like that, like Mad Max, and go, it's good, but it's just kind of ugly. It's not that fun to look at. And then you take a movie like this, you're like, oh, it's got those same qualities, but this is so much more visually pleasing than that. And this is a style, and this is a motif for a movie. Again, you'll never see this kind of thing again. And I would argue it's incredibly original. The idea of all the polar ice caps melting and the Earth being covered with water, a little shaky science there, but we'll go with it, is kind of a different thing. You know, it's not just, we're out in space, this fantasy world, where this is Earth covered in water. Kind of original. Again, it's 25 years old, so it's kind of old hat now, but at the time it was very original. And also to that point, I'm one of those people that when I really like a movie or a book or a story, I go out and I try to find other things like it, because I want more stories like that. An example, I love the movie Valerian, City of a Thousand Planets. I wish they'd make more of those, but probably won't because it didn't do well, but I enjoy that movie. So I went out and I tried to find other books that are like that, and other series and other shows and other movies that are influenced by that, other types of stories. So if you like Mad Max, don't you want to see more of those, more stories that taking all those elements that you love about Mad Max and putting them into a new package and a new type? And I love Star Wars. I want to see other space operas. I love, Indiana Jones, I want to see more adventure movies like that, treasure finding movies. The list goes on and on. So if you like Mad Max, you should love this movie.
Come on out of here, you big nasty animal, you!
Number 2. This was the most expensive movie made at the time, which is used as a negative for it, but that is a great reason to watch this movie and enjoy it for a second time. Some of the bad press that this movie was getting was how expensive it was. And I think that the media targeted this movie to be a failure because they wanted to, what a great story to say, oh, Universal spent all this money on this, hinging all their entire reputation on this one movie, and it's going to flop and sink. Oh, that's a great headline, Waterworld. Oh, this is going to sink the studio. Guess what? Universal's still around. And guess what? The amount of money that they spent on this movie is peanuts, and probably a low-budget movie by today's standards. That's not a very good argument to like, boy, that movie's terrible because they spent so much money on it. Again, I think it's the exact opposite, because when you watch this movie, you can see just about every dollar that's spent on this movie. And what I mean by that is in the actual locations, in practical sets, in practical effects. All those stunts and explosions were done on set or done with miniatures in some cases. You won't see that today. So the money that was spent on this movie, you can watch it and see why it's so expensive for the most part. Oh, let's take this effect, put Kevin Costner on a rig in a green screen room, and we'll add all the explosion stuff behind him. No, that would be a lot cheaper. And honestly, I could probably do that on my computer today. Maybe not as good, but I could, versus them going, all right, let's rehearse this, spend the whole day rigging it and getting all these explosions. And you look at just, I didn't appreciate it when I was younger, like looking at all those effects and how much that would cost to get those effects. And again, they didn't back down as the filmmakers, and Universal continued to supply them with the money, even though they were going over budget, because they believed in the project. And again, it's of a bygone era. You won't see movies like this with real explosions, practical sets. They just won't make movies like this. So there's something special about watching a movie and it being a real explosion happening behind an actor and getting a real reaction to it versus, oh no, look, there's an explosion. I'm running. How many different ways can you design an explosion in a computer versus, oh, we rigged that and that blew up a little bit later and that created this kind of thing. And, then the light was real and you weren't pulled away from that. You look at The Dark Knight, which again is one of my favorite movies as well. And, everybody talks about that scene of the Joker walking out of the hospital and him reacting, the little improv bit of him to the remote because the explosion didn't go off. That wouldn't have happened if that was done in computer. And Christopher Nolan, one of those directors that is trying to bring back practical effects and uses those whenever he can. And you got an extra little great bonus element to that because it was a practical effect. And this movie, Waterworld, is filled with those, where there's just these practical moments that are like, they couldn't have planned for that, those happy accidents, if you will. And you look at the most expensive movies now, the top 5, 2 of them are Pirates of the Caribbean movies, also filmed on water, that's just expensive, and the other 3 are Avengers movies, which I think a lot of that money went towards payroll when you get that many stars in there. And I love the Avenger movies, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying anything bad about those, but sometimes these superhero movies just, I'm numb to all the explosions, effects, colors, just so much stuff happening on screen that I just kind of get numb to it. Whereas movies like Waterworld and others from this time period, where it's like those effects, those explosions, those moments are built up to and mean something because it was a big deal when they made it rather than again, making it now would just be like, explosion, explosion, wave, water, storm, just on and on and on. And you just kind of get overwhelmed. In movies like this, it feels so much more deliberate, and you're seeing the dollars. It's not just, yes, Kevin Costner, I'm sure, was paid a pretty penny to be in this movie. It had a private yacht and all that kind of stuff that we didn't see. But for the most part, you can watch it and see the fight at the atoll and go, oh, wow, that would have taken a long time to film, and a lot of explosions, and a lot of fight, a lot of stuntmen, and you got people on skis jumping over the wall. All those kind of things are so much more interesting because they're real, and it has just that extra quality. And I think just watching it from that standpoint is worth a second watch. And also, by the way, this movie wasn't as big of a flop as people want to make it out to be. Because it cost so much meant that it had more money that it needed to make up, but it almost broke even in the United States. Then overseas sales blew it out of the water, no pun intended, and it made back its budget. And then in merchandising, it even further made up its budget. And Universal Studios, I think it's still going, the Waterworld stunt show. So tell me, again, going back to some of my previous arguments, tell me this isn't an original idea if people aren't paying money still to go see the stunt show on water of the capturing of atoll, that you don't need to know anything about the movie to go, wow, that's just a cool thing to see. I think is pretty good evidence that it's an original idea and it's interesting material moments that's tied together with the story.
Give me the key to the city now.
The number one reason that you should give this movie a second look is to ignore all of the bad press. And I've kind of been leading up to this point through my entire list. That is that the bad press is not a reason not to like it. I think that is probably the biggest argument that I hear of why the movie's not any good, is all of these negative things we've heard about it that influence why we don't like the movie. Now we live in a culture where, we're trying to, there's so much news and information, and you're constantly trying to dissect and go, oh, is this right? Is this true? Oh, these two articles completely contradict each other. That I think we're stuck in the past to look at a movie like this and go, wow, I heard so many bad things about it. So I don't think I like it. They tell a story in the documentary about early on, before they even started production on this movie, and they got wind of this movie being made. And for whatever reason, the media kind of chose that to be the movie that they're going to go after this year. And again, this is all just hearsay. I wasn't there. I don't know. I'm just going off of what people are saying. But so the producers made a decision early on because they were already making reports that this movie was so expensive and they were over budget, and this was going to be the failing of Universal, and they hadn't even started filming yet. They had the script was in rewrites, which is a normal process, and they got Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Costner are going to do this together. Oh, that's going to be a huge fight. And they were already anticipating the negative things because negative press sells more papers. People like to, that juicy gossip, those tabloid headlines kind of thing. And so the producers made a decision early on in the production that they were not going to invite the press to the set, which they now look at and go, maybe that wasn't a good decision because it just made there appear to be more blood in the water, again, no pun intended, for the press to really latch onto. And they went, oh, we're not even invited. Oh, it must be a disaster. Oh, what are they trying to hide? What's going on? Look at this, the huge atoll they're building and all this. And they also suspect that reporters were coming to the island and, hanging out in the bars in the evening and bending the ear of different, low-level crew members and getting little bits of information and then embellishing them, because there were stories of that crew members died and that people were walking off set and all this kind of stuff that just wasn't true, but had some grain of some facts in there that were just way over embellished. And I think that because of the media, they just kind of doomed this production from the start. So I think all of that led to it just having of people just not giving it a chance, and that building on each other to create now, years later, and people go, oh, it's the biggest flop, worst movie of all time, so many problems with the movie. And that shouldn't matter. Strip all that away and just sit back and watch the movie.
Well,
Looks good.
I like it. Nice. I like it better than you realize.
Much better.
Which leads me to my challenge. Now that I've kind of laid this out, and obviously you can see I'm very passionate about this movie. I love this movie, and I'm not asking you to love the movie as much as I am. I don't expect you to, because if you didn't grow up watching it, then I don't think that it'll have the nostalgic leverage that it did. But I hope that I gave you a few reasons in this list that maybe make you scratch your head and go, maybe I didn't give it a chance. Maybe you haven't ever seen it for the first time and just always heard these negative things and never watched it for a time. Or maybe when you first watched it, you had all those negative things rolling around your mind going, yeah, this is bad. Yeah, you're right. Let's make fun of it. That I challenge you. Take some time over the next week and take everything out of your mind. Forget what you've heard about this movie or what you remember about it if you had seen it, and watch it through fresh eyes with an open mind. Just sit back, think about the time that this movie was made, appreciate the elements that are in this movie that you don't see anymore, and just watch it for what it is. And then come back on this video and comment whether you did enjoy it or didn't enjoy it. And let me know, because I'm curious to know if I'm truly just blinded by nostalgia, or if me and a number of the IMDB reviews that I read are correct, that this movie is actually not as bad as people make it out to be. It's fun. It's enjoyable. I'm not saying that it's the greatest movie ever made. I joke with my friend that it's the Citizen Kane of our generation. I don't truly believe that. But it is a great, fun movie. And when you really think about it, isn't that why we watch movies? Is to escape for a couple hours, to have fun, to see far-off worlds that we don't get to see in the normal life. I'm not a big fan of movies that are just slices of life of like things that you see every day anyway. I like to watch movies to escape and to have a new experience that I wouldn't normally get. So for all those reasons, give it a second look. Give it another try, or a third look, or fourth look, or however long it's been since you watched it, or a first look. And come back and let me know what you think. Because I'm not ashamed to say that this movie still holds a prominent space in my top 10 list of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah, I think my work here is done. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. If you want to see more episodes like this, just hit subscribe. I'm trying to change it up a little bit here on the channel and offer some different content. But don't worry, as I said, later in the week, I'll be posting my review of the next Batman Beyond episode. So we'll get back to some routine on that. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Andy Knode, and I'll see you soon.